Assembly is now in session. You may be seated.
Private Member Motion Number 2, 2018, Custom Duty Allowances for Caymanians, to be moved by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for Northside.
Elected member from East End, the Leader of the Opposition. Sorry, North Side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move Private Members Motion Number 2 of 2017-2018, Custom Duty Allowances for Caymanians. Whereas the Customs Law allows the following items to be brought into the Cayman Islands duty-free by all arriving passengers under the age of 18 years. Over the age of 18 years, 1 liter of potable spirits, 4 liters of wine, 1 case not exceeding 8 liters of beer, up to 200 cigarettes, or 100 cigarillos, or 25 cigars, or 250 grams of tobacco. And whereas the Customs Law also allows that residents returning from a visit overseas may bring with them dutiable or household articles at the discretion of the collector up to the value of CI $350. Whereas the Customs Law prohibits the importation of spear guns and spear gun parts, be it therefore resolved that government considers amending the Customs Law to provide that all passengers over the age of 18 years may bring with them into the Cayman Islands the following: 4 liters of potable spirits, 4 liters of wine, 4 cases not exceeding 32 liters of beer, up to 400 cigarettes, or 200 cigarillos, or 50 cigars, or 500 grams of tobacco. And be it further resolved that government consider amending the Customs Law to provide that Caymanians returning from a visit overseas may bring with them dutiable or household articles up to the value of CI $700. And be it further resolved that government consider amending the Customs Law to allow the importation of spear guns and spear gun parts by Caymanians over 18 years of age under license from the National Conservation Council.
Is there a seconder? The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to second private member's motion number 2, 2017-2018.
The question is, be it therefore resolved that government considers amending the Customs Law to provide that all passengers over the age of 18 years may bring with them into the Cayman Islands the following: 4 liters of potable spirits, 4 liters of wine, 4 cases not exceeding 32 liters of beer, up to 400 cigarettes, or 200 cigarillos, or 50 cigars, or 500 grams of tobacco. And be it further resolved that the government consider amending the Customs Law to provide that Caymanians returning from a visit overseas may bring with them dutiable or household articles up to the value of $700. And be it further resolved that the government consider amending the Customs Law to allow the importation of spear guns and spear gun parts by Caymanians over 18 years of age under license from the National Conservation Council. The motion is open for debate. Does the member for Northside wish to speak thereto?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this motion is fairly straightforward, and what the motion seeks to do is to simply double the amount of liquor and cigarettes and cigars and tobacco that all passengers over the age of 18 will be allowed to bring into the island. And it further recommends a change where the Customs Law now provides that all residents returning from a visit from overseas may bring with them dutable or household articles at the discretion of the collector up to the value of CI $350. The motion proposes to change that to say that the government consider amending the customs law to provide that Caymanians returning from a visit overseas may bring with them dutable or household articles up to the value of $700. That section of the resolve does two things, Mr. Speaker. It doubles the value that persons can bring back with them. And who this motion is aimed at, Mr. Speaker, is single parents and other Caymanians who normally make a trip or summer vacation and combine that with shopping and buying school supplies and clothes, etc., for their children. Mr. Speaker, I believe that you and I might have been involved way back a long time ago when it was increased from $150 to this $350, because it's been a substantial time since that has been done. And at that time, $350 was a lot of money in the 80s. If you went into a department store in Florida at that time and you bought $350 stuff, you probably needed to rent a pickup truck yard to the airport. Today, if you go into one of them department stores and buy $350, you can bring it out on your thumb in usually about 2 bags. And the reason why I'm suggesting that we restrict it to Caymanians and not to all residents, because there are residents here, particularly in the upper economic bracket, who travel quite frequently, 10, 15, 20 trips a year would not be unheard of for some of these people. And while they can bring back the liquor and the cigarettes as duty-free items, I don't think they should be allowed to bring back the dutable items up to $700. And it's not very difficult to determine who Caymanians are. You get the customs, you present your Cayman passport. And I know in the past, when this motion was brought, the government's argument against that is that there are people who have Caymanian passports who are not Caymanians. Well, then we need to find out who they are and take the Cayman passport from them. Because one of the reasons to be identified as a Caymanian is to have a Caymanian passport. And I don't know whether these thousands of people out there that have all these Cayman passports and don't qualify for them. And then, Mr. Speaker, the last resolve deals with the matter of spear guns. As you would be aware, in the National Conservation Law, one of the amendments that we managed to get in to the law was that for equipment, which would include spear guns, that the National Conservation Council license Caymanians to use, whether it's spear guns, scenes, nets, etc. The current situation is that we have a lot of Caymanians who have spear gun license, and they have to do a lot of jerry rigging to get them to work, which is dangerous, both to the person using the spear gun and to other people swimming with them. And nobody can make me believe that a spear gun that was licensed in, I think it was 1986, the first Marine Parks license, that those rubbers that spear gun had is still good today. So obviously the people at DOE who are licensing these spear guns every year are turning a blind eye to people getting parts for the guns. Well, we know how they operate. You only got to look at what it is for Joe and Parado at Rum Point. Like recently. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very straightforward motion, and I recommend to the House that they support the motion.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on this occasion to reply to the motion, the private member's motion, on behalf of the government, in my capacity as Minister with responsibility for finance, with customs being one of my subject matters. Mr. Speaker, the motion before us seeks to have government consider amending customs law in 3 respects. First, to increase the amount of alcohol and tobacco that passengers may bring into the islands duty-free by, as the member said, the mover said, doubling it. And secondly, to increase the $350 duty-free exemption that all passengers presently enjoy to $700 for Caymanians only. And third, to allow for the importation of spare gun and spare gun parts by Caymanians over the age of 18 under license of the National Conservation Council. Mr. Speaker, for the sake of convenience, I will deal with the first 2 recitals as one, since they broadly refer to the exemptions allowed to residents returning home from overseas travel. And I will deal separately with the recital calling for the importation of spare guns and spare gun parts. Mr. Speaker, with taking the first 2 recitals, increasing the duty exemption allowances and the duty-free allowances as proposed in the private members' motions will serve to do one thing, that it will serve to encourage Caymanian and resident passengers who can afford to travel to shop overseas as opposed to shopping at home and supporting the local economy. It is not a policy that the government embraces and wishes to pursue. The additional outflows of money out of the economy would only serve to add to the already large current account balance of payments deficit this country experiences, that in 2016 was estimated at some $692 million, or 23.9%, 6% of the country's GDP. Mr. Speaker, the segment of our economy that would be most affected by this is the wholesale and retail industry, particularly small retailers who would, in all likelihood, see a decrease in the demand for their goods. As a result, what you are likely to experience is that the supply of availability of goods locally could contract and prices would increase as retailers seek to mitigate the effects of a reduction in demand and sales and ultimately their profits. The potential impact on the local economy could be significant. Local wholesale and retail businesses may not be able to service the reduced demand, and this could affect their current operations. What it could put in jeopardy too, Mr. Speaker, is affect the number of Caymanians employed locally. Presently, the wholesale and retail industry employs 4,881 persons. Now, Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate for the fall of 2016, reported by the Economics and Statistics Office, showed us that there were 1,785 persons, or 4.1% of the labor force, who were unemployed. Of these unemployed persons, sir, 205, or 11.5%, were seeking employment in the wholesale and retail industry. Such a move could undermine the health and viability of the industry and the 4,881 jobs. Now, the industry, I believe, Mr. Speaker, already struggles to compete against nearshore shopping meccas like South Florida. Our policy is and has been to encourage residents to shop at home, keep the money in our economy, and not send it abroad, thereby supporting the local economy and local employment. Mr. Speaker, the duty allowance of $350 per trip, while it has been in place for many years, is not out of line when compared with the duty allowances in other jurisdictions. For example, in Jamaica, the duty allowance is $500 US per trip. In Antigua, it is $260. Turks and Caicos, it is $400. Bermuda, $200. While in the US and Canada, it is $800 for residents who are out of the country for more than 48 hours. In the United Kingdom, the duty-free allowance is £390 for trips outside of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, should be noted and not overlooked that these countries all have some form of direct taxation as a predictable and stable revenue base. Cayman Islands does not have direct taxation upon which it relies and depends exclusively on various sources of indirect tax revenue in order to ensure that no one source is overtaxed. Mr. Speaker, due to the potential adverse effect on local merchants and the local economy, jobs within the wholesale and retail sector, and the generous amount of our duty allowance when compared with other jurisdictions, the government is unable to support the proposal to increase the duty allowance for Caymanians and residents as contemplated in the motion. Mr. Speaker, if I may now turn to the third recital of the private member's motion dealing with spare guns and spare gun parts. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that this resolution is one that the government is prepared to accept. Considering that is to consider amending the customs law to allow the importation of spare guns and spare gun parts by Caymanians over 18 years of age under license from the National Conservation Council. Mr. Speaker, it is my understanding that the customs law does not specifically prohibit the importation of spare guns and spare gun parts. But what we would need to do is to consider closely what amendments, if any, are necessary. But what we will have to do, we will also have to work
Honorable
closely.
member, if you're going to be much longer, then I'll ask for the suspension of standing orders.
2 minutes.
Start 2 minutes.
2 minutes. If you'll allow me. We will also have to work closely with the National Conservation Council, who I am told, I understand, are developing a spare gun licensing regime that is compliant with Section 22 of the National Conservation Law. The DOE have advised that the National Conservation Council is awaiting legal advice on whether their position and recommendations for the licensing regime is fair, proportionate, and reasonable before they would seek approval for implementation of the regime from Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, it seems clear to me that the NCC is well down the path to developing the regime, and that will govern the licensing of spare guns, and we do await their proposals. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, in asking us to do these three things, the first two, dealing with duty-free allowances, we cannot accept. The third, dealing with spare guns and the related parts and the licensing thereof, we can and do accept. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would ask as we get down to the end of the debate on this, if you would consider putting each of the resolutions to a separate vote to facilitate the rest of the motion. So with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my remarks in response on behalf of the government.
Thank you. I'll call now on the Honorable Premier. We have passed the hour of 4:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
The question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended to enable the business of the House to continue beyond the hour of 4:30 p.m. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The House will continue beyond 4:30 p.m. I will, as the Minister of Finance has requested, I intended to ask for a vote on each of the resolved sections of the motion. Does any other member wish to speak? The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give my support to this motion to the Honorable Opposition Leader in respect to the motion that calls for the doubling of spirits, wines, beers, cigarettes, cigaritos, cigars, and tobacco, as well as the increase in the duty allowance from $350 to $700. I would like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to refer to my manifesto upon which I campaigned on for Georgetown Central. And in my manifesto, Mr. Speaker, on page 10, I committed to the people of Georgetown Central that I would advocate for them to support the increasing of import duty allowances for returning residents from $350 to $500. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that this motion talks about $200 more than what I campaigned on, but the premise of it and where it came from is the fact that, Mr. Speaker, there's many Caymanians who are simply finding it rather difficult in this current market of cost of living in the Cayman Islands. And if they were lucky enough to have the opportunity to get on a plane to go to somewhere else where there are other products that are available that may not be available in the Cayman Islands, they would like to take advantage of it up to a certain price. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree tremendously with the opposition leader in respect to the fact that at the time when the amount of $350 was established was many, many years ago. Although, Mr. Speaker, I am not here, I have the information of when that was established. I may be a bit of a pup at that stage. That's how long ago it was. But, Mr. Speaker, I assumed it was established at a time where the cost of living was tremendously less than it is today. So whatever reasoning that we used at that particular time to allow Caymanian people $350 to get the little extra things they needed while abroad, I don't see why the government today cannot consider to say that in relation to the cost of living and the prices that have increased over the years, that they wouldn't put that back into a balanced ratio today. Now, I think 500 was reasonable. Now, in my manifesto, I did not campaign, Mr. Speaker, on the facts of wines and spirits and cigarettes, because I do believe, even though I'm a consumer now and then of those terrible things, and I would not advocate for anybody in this country to drink too much or smoke. But for those who indulge in it, they should have their equal opportunity as anybody else. So I would support the motion on that basis. But particularly for the duty allowance, I represent across the Cayman Islands many of those persons who don't have the luxury, like many of us in this honorable house today, to pay for the prices that we have in the Cayman Islands. Now, I respect the government, Mr. Speaker, so much for protecting the business community. But I must say this, the business community hasn't been the fairest to Caymanians today. They've been taking advantage of us, overpricing. There's no pricing control in the Cayman Islands, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, we have to find ways to reduce the cost of living, and this may just be one of them. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Premier spoke last night about the difficulties of reducing the cost of living, and his job is to at least not increase it. And I respect him so much for that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is our responsibility that if there's some way we can put some leniency for those who can't afford it, we must find ways to do so. And I'm almost certain if we check the numbers, Mr. Speaker, there's not many of us left anyhow. So the fact and how many of those who are left who actually travel and the effects that it would have on the duty allowances, I question the Minister of Finance how much would it actually affect the income and how much it would affect the market. Now, in respect to the opposition leader suggesting that it might be difficulty because the motion suggests only Caymanians, and that there have been talks of some persons who have Cayman passport but are not Caymanian. Well, if that was what was suggested the last time, I dare say, Mr. Speaker, that a person who has a Caymanian passport, they're as close as possible to being Caymanian anyway, and should be relevant in this motion. And that would alleviate that problem. But to simply use a scare tactic that how much it would affect the local economy. Now, I agree that we should shop local, but I also have to look for the poorer class of people in this country because not many people are looking out for them. And this is who this will affect. I remember many times I looked forward to taking a little trip. So my little $350 can go a lot farther. And by all means, I don't think there's going to be a bum rush of people who are going to decide to leave the island just for a shopping trip. But if they happen to go out on a Christmas trip with their children, they say, you know something, let me catch up a couple little presents or buy something nice for my mommy without worrying that I have to pay duties on it. So I question the government. Outside of only protecting the business community, what about the average person who has to pay the high cost? And we all must agree, Mr. Speaker, that the cost of living in this country is quite high. And there's a large amount of people who are not quite making it. And this is just one of those ways that we can make it a little bit easier. There's not many ways we can, because I agree with the Premier. It's difficult to bring down the cost of living, and managing that process is a very delicate one. But I must agree with the opposition leader in respect to this motion. Now, if the government wants to reconsider the amount to say, well, maybe we can't make 700, maybe we could bring it to 450, add another 100. But every little, how they say it go again? Every one cocoa full basket, I can guarantee you a Caymanian would appreciate an extra $100 if in fact they have the opportunity to go away. So to use that scare tactic, I think is unfair to those out there who would appreciate it. I'm a politician, and I'm glad the people of Georgetown Central gave me the opportunity to be here today, and I still look forward to that little duty allowance, and I make a reasonable salary. So with that being said, Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight my support for the honorable opposition leader in respect to this motion. Now, I want to move on to the third element of this motion. Mr. Speaker, the third element speaks about allowing Caymanians to import spare gun parts for persons over the age of 18. I honestly must say I'm a bit surprised that the Minister for Finance is confused to whether or not that's allowed or not. I think that motion once was sent to this House, that was supposed to be clear. Now, I'm not here to make anybody look bad, but is it allowed or is it not? Now, in respect to the licensing part, I heard what the Honorable Minister of Finance has suggested, that the entities that are overlooking the National Conservation Council in respect to the licensing scheme, and that the government is currently willing to accept that part of this motion. I am glad to hear that, Mr. Speaker. But if we have to sit down and wait on the National Conservation Council to get this done, we may be talking about another 2 years. Say again? It's already been 2, as I heard from my colleagues. Oh, Mr. Speaker, unless the government can give some sort of consideration or commitment in respect to how quickly this can be done, I am appreciative of the fact that they've already accepted their willingness to move forward with that. But there's too many times that we've heard of things that say, yeah, we're going to do it, and they don't get done. And for those who still love our heritage in respect to the opportunity to take their child out and go spear fishing, sadly, my father wasn't around. I didn't have that luxury for him to go with me. But I would love to be able to take my daughters one day. So I would like to know if the government can commit in response at some stage how fast that will happen. Now, forgive me for the assertiveness in my tone, but when it comes to the time to defend the poorer class people in this country, it's a little bit sensitive for me. As well as it's something in my manifesto, and I will dare defend it. I think that there's not enough proof by the Minister of Finance in respect to the ripple effects of adding a few more $100 to the duties other than speculation of the ripple effects. Majority of the time, we make predictions. And we make predictions in our budget, Mr. Speaker. And sometimes those predictions are wrong. So the Minister of Finance can make predictions of the ripple effects, but I think that without supporting evidence of that, because we haven't changed it in many decades, if I am correct in my facts. So how can we say how damaging it would be to our local economy? The truth be told, with the cost of tickets out of this country have decreased so much since we made the 350 mark many, many decades ago. So I'm not sure exactly what kind of amount would hurt the economy. I was hoping that the finance minister, Mr. Speaker, would have been able to come here and defend his position, not to agree with it, by way of saying, this is how many flights leave and how many Caymanians are on those flights and how many of those Caymanians buy this amount, to put a figure to that in respect to the loss of revenue. But I hear speculation, Mr. Speaker, in respect to that loss. I respect them for protecting the market. But that's one part of our society, the business community. You have the shoppers too. And someone has to look out for them as well. So with that being said, Mr. Speaker, I want to give my support to the Honorable Opposition Leader, and I hope that the government would reconsider their position, as it would affect many people who don't have the opportunity to pay the high prices in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does the elected member for Newlands?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't be long, as I think my good friend from Central said it all. But I had to rise today to give my support to this motion and make note that this is not the first time I've seen this motion or something similar come to this Honorable House. In the same train of thought as my colleague from Georgetown Central, Mr. Speaker, this motion is not about doing damage to the economy, but trying to give the average Caymanian a little hand up. Mr. Speaker, quite recently in Florida, and I think it's an annual thing now, they have a back-to-school tax-free weekend where school supplies are completely tax-free. 2 weeks ago. Take that into consideration, Mr. Speaker, and I know not one single member of this Honorable House can sit here today and say it hasn't happened to them, that they have been approached by constituents asking for assistance with school supplies. As recent as today, I got a text message while sitting here. We have Caymanians who need help. This, I think, is a small gesture, one small change that this government could do to assist the needy Caymanians in particular. My plan was to actually travel to Florida to purchase school supplies, which has become an annual thing for us where we donate to the needy. That didn't work out for me. However, Mr. Eden and I are going to continue with our efforts to assist those in need. But just think, during this time of year, Mr. Speaker, many Caymanians take that one annual family trip. And I think the majority end up in Florida. And that small increase in their duty allowance would have come in very very handy for many families, Mr. Speaker. I don't think, and I agree with member from Georgetown Central, that this is going to destroy the country's economy. And I remember the previous finance minister going at lengths to say that it would, or a similar proposal would. But this is a small thing that we can do for our people at a time when cost of living, despite those on the other side who say that I have it wrong and that I'm not an economist, cost of living is affecting our people. And we have to find ways, in the same way that as the Premier said last night, Mr. Speaker, that we can't just give education all the priority because there are other areas of government that need to be prioritized, and we have to look out for certain industries and so forth. We also have to look out for the small man. And we have to do these little things, these small little changes that will have a significant impact on the pocket of the average Caymanian. Mr. Speaker, we don't have price controls in this country. And there are many who agree that we shouldn't have price controls. But just to give you an example, I like to wear polo shirts, the collared ones. For me to purchase a polo shirt on this island cost me $95 CI. I can find the same shirt in Dolphin Mall in Miami for $30 US. It's ridiculous. And so we go to great lengths to protect the business community, to make sure that they can operate and earn a profit and hire people. I appreciate that. But we're not doing very much for the average Caymanian who is subjected to these high prices, and I call it price gouges in some instances. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, many Caymanians may take one family trip a year, and the rest of the time they shop locally, and they're subjected to these high prices. So I think it balances out in the end. I don't think that we should worry too much about the potential impact on government's revenue. Because in my mind, and I haven't done the math, but in my mind, I don't think it will be a significant impact. Most families taking one trip a year, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's going to break the bank. I am glad, however, to see that the government is willing to support the spare gun recommendation, spare gun parts in the motion, because for quite some time we have heard in this Honorable House concerns about the safety involved in spear fishing, using guns with parts that are worn out, not just for the person doing the spear fishing, but anyone else in the water with them. And I remember it was about 4 years ago, just over, that amendment to the conservation law or bill at the time was made. And we heard from way back then that the government was going to bring forth a licensing regime and a proposal on how to move forward with this. And I really hope none of us were holding our breath. But we did hear comments about it not seeing the light of day. And so far it hasn't. So I join in the call, Mr. Speaker, for us to put a definitive delivery date on that, if the government is willing to move forward. And don't let it be another empty promise that won't see the light of day. Spear fishing is a part of our heritage. I did it with my father, Mr. Speaker. I hope to do it with my children. Unfortunately, I don't have a spare gun license and I don't have a spare gun. But we keep chipping away at these little privileges that belong to our people. And over time, our people are ending up with nothing. So I know I'll get beaten up a little bit later on when someone from the government side gets up and says I'm being irresponsible and I don't understand how the economy works and how government works. But, Mr. Speaker, the people of Newlands put me here. And I am going to advocate for them because I see the benefit of doing things like this for our people. And I don't care who beats up on me. At the end of the day, I'm accountable to the people in Newlands. And they, I think, will appreciate, as they did this election, what kind of job I can do for them. Barely. I'm still here, though. So, next time around, it may be different. But I plan to advocate and work for my people and the people that put me here. So whether I barely made it or not, I thank God every day for the opportunity. And that is why I'm here, Mr. Speaker. And I strongly support this motion, and I ask all members to consider giving it their support. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other?
Like a coward, so you could get elected.
Coward is unparliamentary. The member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really wasn't planning on speaking on this motion. However, after listening to the reason given by the government side as to why they're not supporting it, I was a little bit perplexed. And the reason being is that it was being said that this motion would actually hurt small businesses. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that there are members inside it who have no idea how small businesses really operate. First of all, Mr. Speaker, no government around the world has yet to prove that taking a dollar out of the economy and putting it back inside there has been more efficient than leaving it there in the first place. Mr. Speaker, our tax base is consumption driven. So simply put, Mr. Speaker, if we leave more money in people's pockets, it means that they have more money to spend with business. So I cannot understand, Mr. Speaker, by saying to us that with government collecting this money and people having less money to spend because we have not given it to the government in duty, is that would actually help small business. Now, if the government is telling us now that it's going to take from their ability to do away with mandatory pensions on expats, which will help small businesses, then I can understand that argument, Mr. Speaker. If the government is saying that you're looking at ways to lower health costs that will help small businesses, then that I can understand, Mr. Speaker. But to sit back and tell us that leaving money in Caymanian pockets, leaving their hard-earned money in Caymanian pockets is bad for business, when we need them to keep their money to go patronize businesses, really makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. I recently went out, Mr. Speaker, and buy a lot of school bags for my district. And I was actually tempted, Mr. Speaker, to jump on a flight last Saturday morning up to Miami, go into Walmart and buy the same JanSport bags, which would cost just equivalent of under 15 CI dollars. For members inside this chamber who did similar, they can tell you that those bags will run anywhere from $25 to $32 locally. Now, this is something, Mr. Speaker, that we're looking to give away with, to give back to our community. And it would have been cheaper. But instead, at least I can speak for me, where I chose to just say, you know what, let me spend the time on island and spend the money locally, even though for the purpose of what I wanted, it could have gone much further by jumping on a plane and going there. But to sit down and try to make believe to the Caymanian people that taking money out of their pockets is helping business goes very far, Mr. Speaker, and that I can tell you. So unlike my colleague here from Newlands who said he may not understand the economy, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, I am one of them inside this chamber that do understand this economy and how it works. And I can tell you the poor excuse given is really and truly, better they just say they don't want to do it, but don't say they're helping small businesses, because there's nothing or no track record of any initiative that I've even seen going through the SPS is there to help small businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister for Financial Services.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a very, 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 very brief contribution to this motion. And it is only to state a fact that seems to be lost in all of the conversation, that seems to be very much focused on our ability to provide school supplies to our various constituents, for the constituents' ability to provide school supplies for their children, seems to be the very passionate argument that we hear as to why this particular motion should be passed. I just want to remind people in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, as well as people in the listening public, that during the last administration, we actually made school supplies duty-free. And so whether or not you travel, the cost of purchasing an airfare and going overseas to purchase your goods and bringing it back, the cost, of course, can accumulate there. Many people in the community, Mr. Speaker, and I have to confess I'm not one of those, so I cannot speak the specifics of that, but the principle still remains the same. People order online. They order their supplies remotely, internet banking. We have several internet banking gurus in this particular chamber, I'm sure, so they may be able to give more color to that particular process. But the fact is, school supplies are duty-free. So there is no benefit to the discussion being had about the government not taking into consideration the ability to supply the needs of our community as it relates to providing for our children. And again, I'm sure that the now Minister for Education and other members in this chamber feel as passionate as I am when we talk about providing for our children, and certainly coming from my historical position, this is something that we fought very hard to achieve and we managed to bring in force during the last administration, and I just wouldn't want it to be lost in the discussion here today. Thank you.
The elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I rise to support this motion by my good friend and leader of the opposition. And like my good friend from Bardentown West, I wasn't going to speak. I was just going to vote yes. But the Minister for Financial Services has inspired me to speak. And I should say to her, Mr. Speaker, that is precisely the reason you'll get it. Because if they duty free, somebody killing the Caymanians when they get it there. Because they're 4 times the price here that you can get it overseas. School supplies are at 4 times the price in this country than you can get it overseas. I hope they're not bringing it in duty free, because that's price gouging. But I am saying we need to save all how. Whilst it may not fall into to that $700, the mere fact that we are saying support the small businesses or the businesses in this country, you are not getting the duty-free benefit here. That's number one. That's number one. That's all I'm saying. Whilst the parent can bring it in duty-free, they need to go someplace else try buy it because they're not getting the benefit of the duties here or the duty-free status on school stuff here. That is why we have always argued that we have no way of putting mechanisms in place to ensure the Reaganomics in removing duty, the trickle-down effect. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work for many other things. And there are reasons why, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the population in this country, it is very difficult to support businesses and for them to become profitable unless you have a very good product. That's why the cost of purchasing in this country is so high. That's precisely why the cost is so high. I heard examples being given. Mr. Speaker, I recently needed a part for my truck. It was just nearly $1,200. Call my friend in Miami to purchase it for me. From the dealer, it was just under $160. And yeah, that's $1,200. Yeah, you got 20% on that. I don't want to stop the businesses. I don't want to kill the businesses by doing something here that would adversely affect them or putting my signature on something that would adversely affect them. But we all know that it's a small price for this country to pay for the returning Caymanians to get a break. It's a small price to pay. The minister came up with all examples of all over the world, all over the Caribbean, so to speak, as to what the exemptions are. There are other exemptions in other places as well, absolutely. And if we are going to use those as our guidelines, then maybe that's all well and good because they're around the same amount. 500 US, some 400 or 500 US. Except for America, which I believe he says it's 800 US for returning residents. But Mr. Speaker, so many times it makes all that difference. And I am not subscribing to it being for the needy, because the needy can't go and catch a plane and go away. I think it's basically for someone to assist with being able to stretch the monies that are made in this country that much more. So I'm not going to advocate that it's for the needy, because the needy is supported by the government, really. People who go away just to shop have some money, but they can stretch it that much more if they are allowed duty-free exemptions that are a little higher. Mr. Speaker, on the third part of that motion, I am a little surprised that we would be separating the vote on it because it's one motion. it's three separate resolutions, but I thought that we would have amended it. But be that as it may, were you to amend it? Did you want it? It's you who want it, not me.
Honorable Member, Standing Order 2413 says, if a motion embodies two or more separate propositions, the propositions may be proposed by the presiding officer as separate questions.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very comfortable with that. I understand that. Why I try and confuse it? I'm just saying I don't know why we didn't amend the motion if you're not going to do it. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the Premier getting in my debate for, and not being no one trying to stop him. Mr. Speaker, let me go on to the third resolution.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, I know we're in an ant's nest in here, and we have to. There's a minefield in here, and we have to negotiate our way through it. But I'm pretty good at negotiating my way through minefields. I'm not legless as yet. Mr. Speaker, I do not understand why the National Conservation Council has taken 4 years, almost 4 years, to effect this change. There seems to be a deliberate attempt to stop that provision of spear guns being put in place in this country. This was done, as far as I remember, in December 2013 under the previous administration. The old Marine Conservation Board, members of that went straight over onto the National Conservation Council, and they carried those same ideas of banning spear guns in this country. When I moved that motion here at committee stage of the National Conservation Law, and the members of the government, including one current minister, voted for those changes, it is the will of this legislature that they must adhere to. But there seems to be Parliament being held in these board meetings of these appointed boards. Mr. Speaker, that needs to stop. It needs to stop. This is the will of the people that must be adhered to, must be strictly followed. And the provisions put in place to ensure that these things are done. The former minister would not put that section of the law in place until 1 year before he remitted office. And it's still not been completed. That's like planning a building in this country, and it takes 1 year to build a toilet block. It has taken forever because no one wants to see it get in place. And just maybe the minister is correct that we need to look at the customs law, because under the customs law, there are no provisions about spear guns. But someone needs to know in customs that it's allowed, because they continue to, directives are there that they're not allowed to bring it in. So I welcome the minister's suggestion that he will have to look at that. But this thing should have been in place a long time ago. We should not have to be bringing motions to this honorable house when the will of this house was expressed to the civil service a long time ago. Mr. Speaker, I believe that all three resolutions are worthy of receiving the government's support. The government says no. The government must have its way. However, I should remind the government bench that the minister made it very clear that it will affect the retail and wholesale businesses in this country. So I hasten to remind the members of the government bench that they should take heed of that when they consider how they're going to vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just quite briefly. Mr. Speaker, if I can seek to unmuddy the waters that were stirred up by my friend, the member from East End, the motion that is before the House, which has been drafted and moved by the member from East End's leader, the leader of the opposition, is quite properly drafted. It provides 3 resolved sections, each dealing with separate issues, and invites a vote on each of those issues. And so there is some confusion in the House at the proposal by the member from East End that we should amend the motion. I see no need to amend the motion, nor do I see any way that it could possibly be amended to improve the way it's been set out. So I just wish to make that procedural point before I say a few words about the motion itself. Mr. Speaker, this motion, in one form or another, has been brought to this House on a number of occasions, seeking to provide duty-free status to cigarettes and alcohol in one section. I'm not sure why we should be doing that. And I don't mind a few glasses of whiskey either, but I expect that we should pay for those sins and not expect the rest of the people who don't indulge in such activities to pay for them, because that's what we're doing. If we suggest that we don't charge duty on these, we have to charge it on other things to make up the revenue so we can spend it on all the long list of things that the members of the opposition have so creatively proposed. And so, Mr. Speaker, the government is not inclined to agree to the first resolve section for that reason. We are not going to allow people to drink and smoke free in the country. On the second point, Mr. Speaker, the second resolve section, which asks us to increase the duty-free allowance for Caymanians, to take it away from residents, I should say, take it away from residents, but to increase it for Caymanians who are coming back to Cayman with dutiable or household articles up to the value of $700, twice what is the current duty-free allowance. Let me say a couple of things about that, Mr. Speaker. The first is that $350 is $437.50 US. The allowance is not per family, but per person. So if a family, which I would say the average family is 4 people, the duty-free allowance is $1,750 US dollars. That means you purchase whatever you purchase over there up to the value of $1,750. There is no duty at all payable. That, Mr. Speaker, by any stretch, is a most generous allowance. I know I've been away many times and bought lots of things with my family, and I am always stunned at how low the amount that we have to pay in terms of duty is. Because when most things attract duty at 20% or 22%, and school supplies are duty-free, you got to buy a whole lot of stuff. That this $1,750 of duty-free allowance doesn't significantly help you. And so, Mr. Speaker, while it is a very good political move, been around long enough to understand that, and the opposition started their campaign for the next election very early. Very early. I agree. It's a very good political move. But, Mr. Speaker, not only is it unnecessary, but despite the fact that the member from Bordentown West claims he understands the economy, for the life of me, and perhaps it's because I lack his qualifications, I cannot understand how encouraging Caymanians to spend money in Miami is going to assist the local economy. Nor for the life of me do I understand how spending money in Miami to purchase things does not impact the local merchants here from whom those goods would otherwise have been purchased. Nor do I understand how the member from Bordentown West and the member from Central don't seem to appreciate that those small businesses which they have decried are the same small businesses which we need to employ their constituents, whom we all know, not just theirs, but all of ours, but theirs in particular, because it's the two of them I'm addressing, their constituents who need jobs. Nor do they seem to appreciate that the owners of small businesses in Cayman are principally Caymanians, and that they ought to be concerned about their welfare as well, and to encourage the growth of small business, not to propose things which continue to erode the viability of those businesses. And the member from East End did, and he was the only one over there who acknowledged it when they spoke. The member from East End did recognize that a big part of the challenge with prices in Cayman is volume, or the lack thereof, of businesses. the more people you have accessing those goods and services, the more that the economies of scale can come into play. But the smaller volume of business and trade you have, understandably, the higher the level of the prices. It is the converse of the old Chinese businessman approach to things. You sell it very cheap, you sell plenty. But if you reduce the scope and you encourage and you actively encourage the purchase, as members on the other side have been doing, encourage the purchase of merchandise overseas, for the life of me, I don't care how many schools the member from Bontown West went to and how many degrees he has, I can't understand, with my obvious lack of education in economics, how that is not going to impact the local economy, how that is not going to negatively impact local businesses. And so, Mr. Speaker, this government is keenly conscious of the need to continue to do everything we can to control or to lower the cost of doing business. This government is only, and members on this side are only too keenly aware of the challenges that many of our constituents face in meeting day-to-day bills. I can promise you, no one over on that side is likely to have received more requests for assistance with school supplies than I have. And I have been around longer than many of them. So I've been receiving them for a much longer time. So I am keenly aware of these things. But as the Minister for Financial Services pointed out, which seemed to come as a surprise to members on the other side, there are no duties on school supplies, courtesy of the previous administration. So when I heard that being urged in aid of the arguments on the other side as to why we should double the duty-free allowance, I knew then, Mr. Speaker, that they were quite desperate to try to shore up what is an otherwise very weak argument. And so, Mr. Speaker, for the reasons that have been put forward by my colleagues on this side, and for those few points that I have made, the government can see no proper basis on which to accede to resolutions 1 and 2 of this motion. The third resolution sought, Mr. Speaker, is one, as the Minister for Finance has said, the government is prepared to entertain, and the government too shares the frustration of the House that the matter is still pending long after we have, as a House, in the previous administration, agreed that it should have been addressed. And we shall do everything we can to ensure that the matter is now addressed with alacrity. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I call an removal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the government for accepting resolution number 3, moving the prohibition for the importation of new spear guns and spear gun parts from the customs law. But there's no joy in my heart because I know it not happen. The Minister of Finance don't even know what section of the law needs amended. I'm not the Minister of Finance, and my responsibility and what the customs law talks about are things that are prohibited by the customs law that are prohibited by other legislation. That's the section that needs to be amended. So, to avoid that, what we're simply saying is to amend the customs law to allow, specifically allow the importation of spear gun parts and new spear guns. Very simple amendment. But, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, sorry, I am troubled from a government that brags about protecting businesses. Mr. Speaker, it's not too many small businesses in Cayman that's selling these dutiful goods here, household goods that we're talking about, you know. Not too many small businesses doing that. But, Mr. Speaker, if an increase is going to be such a calamity to the small businesses, you would have thought that the government would have had a resolution here to amend the law to make it zero. In their zealous intention and commitment to the business community. No balance. Here's the difference. This, the Premier says, is a good political move for the opposition. We represent Caymanians. We're constantly talking about Caymanians. The question is, why is it not also a good political move for the government? No, this has nothing to do about looking. This has all to do about who you're compelled to cater to and who you're compelled to represent in here because of the political implications thereof.
Honorable members, be careful with the imputations.
Mr. Chairman,
And
the Premier
no,
mentioned
no,
politics, not
not
me. You didn't correct him.
I must say, not you. You talking politics, and politics, as I know, is accepted in the House. The other imputations are made for members sitting down, and it is carried. They are imputations,
Mr. Speaker,
and I'm not going to accept it. I am not. The member for East End constantly is talking while somebody else is talking. I've given a lot of leeway and some levity in it. Stop it. Continue, member.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, sir, I do.
No, the matter has been spoken to. I invite the member for East End to Borden Town outside to continue.
Mr. Speaker, that part of the problem and part of the necessity to provide this limited relief to Caymanians in need is because of the business people practices. You heard an example given about a car park coming from the same two dealers now. I'll give you one similar. I need a propeller for my boat. I called the local supplier. $296. CI. Plus labor to install it. From a dealer in Miami, $60 US. That's the standard kind of markup. Composition book, which the Minister of Financial Services correctly reminds us is duty free. Same book, 99 cents, Staples, Miami. $296. $2.95 up in Cayman and duty free. But let's assume, Mr. Speaker, that 10,000 Caymanians, and I'm not so sure that many of them left, were granted the $750. We're talking about 7.5 million. Average duty, 20%. 1.5 million. 1.5 million loss of government revenue, which the Premier claims we're moving motions to spend all the government money and to keep government from getting any money. 1.5 million out of customs revenue is estimated to be over $100 million this year. 1.5%. Can't give that to the average Caymanian. But giving a developer $30, $40 million, no big deal. No big deal. Remember that in the developer's case, he's not consuming something. He is only, the duties and the fees that he would pay is cost of business. He pass it on to the person he's selling it to. Not coming out of his pocket. This coming out of hard-earned money by the average working Caymanian. And the Premier said that if a family of 4 travel, they would get $1,700. Speak subject to correction, but I think you got to be 18 to get the allowance. Okay? Each. Okay. But let's look at the liquor that they say I want to make everybody drunk. And you know, my mantra, when I go out, I have 2. You know, record of me getting drunk anywhere, because I don't care who you is. We go to dinner, I'll have 2 beers, I'll have 2 glasses of wine, but that's it. Can't make as a miller have more than 2 drinks in one night. It's called self-control. Yeah, we got paid duty. But here's the difference. We're quite comfortable with the status quo, where the average Caymanian, most of us drink rum. We don't drink wine. We can only have 1 liter. But most of them other people who drink wine, it's okay for them to get 4 times as much. Just making a point. Public must think who are the wine drinkers in our community. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the Minister of Public Finance and Development bringing an amendment to the law to reduce it to 0 so he can save all of the small businesses. And Mr. Speaker, talking about the rules, I would just draw you and all members' attention. Standing order 83 when we go to vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You may put the vote. Be careful how you vote. Read 83 before you vote. That's my job. You did the best you can, but no argument at all. You're a lawyer, and that's what you get paid to do.
There are several aspects, several resolutions to this motion, and I'm going to put them separately. It reads as follows: be it therefore resolved that government considers amending the customs law to provide that all passengers over the age of 18 years may bring with them into the Cayman Islands the following: 4 liters of potable spirits, 4 liters of wine, 4 cases not exceeding 32 liters of beer, up to 400 cigarettes or 200 cigarillos or 50 cigars or 500 grams of tobacco. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, could I have a division, please?
Clerk, a division.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize.
The member for Central Georgetown.
I apologize for my lack of understanding of the protocol, but am I clear that we are voting on the 3 different parts separately, correct?
Correct.
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
No.
Honorable Moses Kirkconnell.
Abstain under Standing Order 83.
Honorable Juliana Connor Connolly. No. Honorable Dwayne Seymour.
No.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
No.
Honorable Joseph Hugh.
Abstain.
Honorable Tara Rivers. Honorable Barney Bush. Captain Eugene Ebanks. Ms. Barbara Connolly.
No.
Mr. David White.
No.
Mr. Austin Harris.
No.
Honorable Ezra Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Awasiku.
Aye.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan.
No.
Mr. Anthony Eden.
No.
Mr. Christopher Saunders.
Aye.
Mr. Arden McLean.
Aye.
Results, division,
Mr. Speaker.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, sir, out of an abundance of caution, the member from Georgetown West would like to change his, or to abstain, to change his, out of an abundance of caution, because he does run a gas station that does sell cigarettes.
I think honorable member from Georgetown West, the premier has asked for
Mr. Speaker, I would like to change my vote. I would abstain out of abundance of caution.
yes.
You happy?
I think we can allow that without any problem. Honorable members, there has been a request, and I think we should abide by that request. I think it's fair to do that. Honorable members, in accordance with the wishes of yourselves, The results are as follows: 4 ayes, 9 noes, 3 abstentions, and 2 absentees. That section of the motion has failed to be carried. To be absolutely clear. In accordance, the question is that be it further resolved that the government consider amending the customs law to provide that Caymanians returning from a visit overseas may bring with them dutiable or household articles up to the value of $700. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no?
No.
The noes have it. Clerk, divide, please.
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
No.
Honorable Moses Kirkconnell.
Abstain.
Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
No.
Honorable Dwayne DeSeymour.
No.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
No.
Honorable Joseph Hugh.
Abstain.
Honorable Tara Rivers. Honorable Barney Bush. Captain Eugene E. Banks. Miss Barbara Connolly.
No.
Mr. David White.
Abstain.
Mr. Austin Harris.
No.
Honorable Ezra Miller. Mr. Alva Saku.
Aye.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Anthony Eden.
Aye.
Mr. Christopher Saunders.
Yes.
Mr. Ord McLean.
Aye.
The results of the division: 6 ayes, 7 noes, abstentions, 3, absentees, 2. The motion has failed. And in the last resolved section, the question is that be it further resolved that the government consider amending the customs law to allow the importation of spare guns and spare gun parts by Caymanians over 18 years of age under license from the National Conservation Council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, could I have a division, please?
Clerk?
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
Aye.
Honorable Moses Kirkconnell.
Aye.
Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
Aye.
Honorable Dwayne Seymour.
Aye.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
Aye.
Honorable Joseph Hugh.
Abstain.
Honorable Tara Rivers. Honorable Barney Bush. Captain Eugene E. Banks. Miss Barbara Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. David White. Mr. Austin Harris.
Aye.
Honorable Ezra Miller. Mr. Alva Saku.
Aye.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan. Mr. Anthony Eden,
Aye.
Mr. Christopher Saunders,
Yes.
Mr. Arden McLean,
Yes.
The results of the division, 15 ayes, 1 abstention, and 2 absentees. The resolution has been carried.
private member motion number 3 of 2017-18, construction or purchase of housing, to be moved by the elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to bring the motion to the floor of the House. Motion number 3, 1718, which reads as construction or purchase of housing, whereas there is a growing concern emanating from members of the public who are granted temporary housing assistance by the Needs Assessment Unit, NAU, that they will be unable to secure rental accommodations. And whereas members of the public who are granted housing assistance are expected to locate and secure rental accommodations on their own. And whereas many landlords are refusing to rent to those who have been granted temporary housing assistance by government because government does not provide the necessary deposits, and quite often payments are frequently delayed or disputed by the NAU. Be it now therefore resolved that government considers immediately appropriating sufficient funds to construct or purchase 52-bedroom apartments to address the need for housing of those who are granted temporary housing.
Is there a seconder to this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The motion was supposed to be seconded by the member from West Bay North. But, oh, sorry, my apologies. Yeah, this was mixed up. I rise to second the motion. Sorry.
Is the member wishing to speak to the motion?
Mr. Speaker, I do rise to speak to the motion, though I would like to announce that I have intentions to forgive me, Mr. Speaker. I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I brought this motion to the House some 10 days before the House proceeded. But I want to rise to say a few words in respect to what I heard last night by the Honorable Premier Alan McLaughlin and his administration in response to my motion. First, I would like to congratulate the Honorable Premier, particularly because he is the Honorable Minister responsible for the areas of concern in respect to this motion. I'd like to also thank his caucus for considering my motion and putting considerations within the strategic policy statement to address the matter of which my motion highlights. I want to turn the audience's attention to the members, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, the Honorable Premier Alan McLaughlin's speech just last evening in respect to responding to my motion. And I want to read a portion of his speech before I move on to the other elements of my motion. And it says, I can confirm that we will address the concerns of the effectiveness of the needs assessment unit, as well as improve the speed at which landlords and others who provide services to our social services agencies receive payment. Both of these are major areas of complaint and we will correct this. Whilst I appreciate the concern and desire for government to construct or purchase housing to be used for temporary accommodation by social services, the fact is that approach is not only impractical and cannot be afforded in this budget, but is also necessary. Is also unnecessary. My apologies, Mr. Speaker. There is sufficient housing stock available in the private sector. The issue that landlords have is with receiving payments in a timely manner, as well as concerns about damage caused to their property. By ensuring that rent payments are received on time and that they are treated fairly regarding damages, then we can largely solve the issue. And I want to repeat again, then we can largely solve the issue. And I highlight that, and I will come back to that point why I said it twice. Without government taking on the burden of owning an estate of houses with the ongoing operating costs, the approach we are taking is affordable and practical. Now, Mr. Speaker, I started my deliberations by thanking the Honorable Premier for addressing my motion in the strategic policy statement. Because the Honorable Premier and his administration and his members have already addressed two of the major concerns in my motion. Because my motion reads of three main things that were a problem. First being the frequent delays by the needs assessment unit on payment for those who been granted assistance and are renting from private landlords, and the fact that the needs assessment unit sometimes disputes damages or delayed payments or the likes. Unfortunately, the government has not addressed the third element of my motion, which is to provide the necessary deposits in order to get temporary housing. But although I recognize that they have not addressed that, based on the actions of the Honorable Premier and his administration, I feel confident that the Honorable Premier and his team, particularly that of his ministry, will seek to address it. Because, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Premier did not have to take into consideration my motion in the strategic policy statement. So for that, I am very grateful. It gives me the indication that he truly do want to solve the problem as he suggested in the strategic policy statement. So with that being said, I want to reiterate the fact that he said he can solve the problem. I only ask of the government to consider the third element of the deposit, which continues to be a hurdle. But with that being said, I want to ask this honorable House to accept a leave of this House, if I'm correct in my wording. I request from the Speaker a leave of the House for me to withdraw this motion.
Thank you. The honorable members, the question is that private members' motion number 3 be withdrawn under Standing Order 24 14. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Private member's motion number 3 is therefore withdrawn.
Private member motion number 4 of 2017-2018, increase of monthly seaman benefits to be moved by the elected member for Georgetown Central.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to bring the private member's motion number 4, 2017-2018. And the motion reads, motion to increase the monthly seaman benefits. Whereas many of our retired seamen are finding it increasingly difficult to provide the basic necessities such as food, clothing, and health care for themselves and their families due to the increase of cost of living, and whereas a number of the members of the government campaigned to increase the seaman benefits, be it therefore resolved that the government consider immediately appropriating sufficient funds to increase the grant amounts for seaman beneficiaries to 1,000 Cayman Islands dollars.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I have this right now. The member from West Bay North was supposed to second this, but he's not here, so I will second it.
Does a member wish to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite similar to my last motion, Mr. Speaker, I'll follow down similar lines with great pleasure in this honorable House. Again, I want to congratulate the Premier and his members for considering my motion and the strategic policy statement. My motion asks simply for the government to increase the seaman grant from $550 to $1,000. The Honorable Premier, in his speech yesterday for the strategic policy statement, addressed my motion by agreeing to increase it over a 2-year period from a sum of $550 to $650 starting next year, 2018, and then subsequently increasing it to $750 in 2019. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do accept that this is not the 1,000 that I expected for the seamen, but I still would like to give my thanks to the Premier and his administration for the consideration, because I accept that I am an opposition member and the government didn't have to accept my motion in this capacity. I'd also like to give my understanding to why they came to the amount of $750 based on explanation by the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Honorable Premier Alden McLaughlin just yesterday. In the strategic policy statement delivery, the Honorable Premier suggested that there will not only be an increase in the seaman benefits, but also for the poor relief, which we all know also gets $550, which I do agree with the government. They also need this increase. But it was an intention of mine to bring that motion as well in the future. But because the fact that I am a newbie to this honorable House, I want to take one step at a time, Mr. Speaker.
I haven't seen an amendment. Continue, member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I appreciate, though I had the intentions and did not want to overwhelm myself with too many motions on my very first round, I only presented the 2 motions that we are hearing today. But I'm glad to see that this administration and the Honorable Premier, we are on both the same level in respect to this social concern that needed to be addressed. So yesterday, the Premier suggested that there will be an increase on the pro relief, quite similar to that of the Cayman grant, increasing at the start of 2018 from $550 to $650, and in 2017 to $750. But he also went on to say that the government is also going to be giving pension grant to those pensioners, former civil servants, who may not be receiving very high numbers of pension due to the time period upon which they retired. As we all know, the pension law just came in recently. So there's a number of civil servants whose pension are very small. And I heard the Premier acknowledging a former civil servant pensioner to the amount of $23.00. And I agree with the Honorable Premier that that's just unacceptable, and we have to do our part to assist those individuals. So with that being said, in closing, I want to again thank the members of his caucus for considering this portion in my motion, but also going farther than that and recognizing that there's other Caymanians out there who are in this need. Now, of course, I would like it to have been higher, but I understand that the Minister of Finance has the eyes on the books and will make the judgment call based on the fact they're increasing 4 different areas rather than just the one area that I proposed in my motion. So I accept that the $750 is within reason, and I do hope that the government will, as promised in the SPS, look back at the figures again at the end of this 2-year budget cycle. And with that being said, I would like to ask this Honorable House for a leave. How's it going?
To withdraw.
A leave to withdraw my motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that private member's motion number 4 be withdrawn under Standing Order 2414. All those in favor, say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. I propose at this time to take the evening break until 7:15.